Have you ever wondered what fuels the Nazgul? These terrifying wraiths who serve Sauron with unyielding loyalty are enough to send shivers down the spine of even the bravest. But how did these sinister servants come into being? Their story is one of ambition, corruption, and a fate far worse than death. Once mighty kings, they were eventually ensnared by Sauron's dark influence. What led these noble rulers to become the dreaded ring-wraiths? The truth behind their origins is as dark and chilling as the Nazgul themselves. Let's uncover their tragic tale together. Rise of the Nazgul. The Nazgul, or ring-wraiths, were not born of evil or malevolence. They were once powerful and noble kings, high lords and great warriors of Middle-earth. But their story is forever intertwined with the One Ring, the source of both their strength and their curse. It all began in the Second Age, when the Dark Lord Sauron, disguised as the fair and wise Anatar, the Lord of Gifts, made his first attempt to corrupt the peoples of Middle-earth. He offered the elven smiths of Eregion the knowledge to forge the rings of power, supposedly to bring peace and unity to the world. However, Sauron had a darker purpose in mind: to dominate all those who wore these rings. The elves forged 3 rings for themselves, known as the Elven Rings. But Sauron also had the One Ring crafted in secret. This Master Ring would give him control over the others, allowing him to dominate the minds and wills of those who held the lesser rings. 9 mortal kings, rulers of great realms, were deceived by Sauron's promises. They were given rings of power, which granted them extraordinary abilities, prolonged life, immense strength, and unmatched knowledge. These kings, driven by their desire for greater control and immortality, eagerly accepted Sauron's gift. But with their acceptance came their downfall. Slowly, the influence of the rings began to take hold. Their wearers were corrupted by the ring's power, and one by one, they fell under Sauron's domination. Over time, they became phantoms of their former selves, dark shadows, wraiths bound to the will of Sauron. The Nazgul were born, their humanity stripped away, leaving only a hollow shell of their once great rulers. The transformation wasn't immediate. At first, the kings were granted extraordinary longevity and dominion over their lands. However, as the years passed, they began to change. They were no longer truly mortal, but neither were they immortal. Their minds became clouded and their bodies decayed, unable to age in the normal way, but not able to escape the slow erosion of their humanity. Eventually, they faded into the shadow world, neither alive nor dead, bound forever to the One Ring and to Sauron. The transformation into wraiths. The transformation of the 9 kings into the Nazgul was both slow and horrific. It began with the gradual loss of their human form. At first, the kings retained a semblance of their former glory. They could still rule their realms, command armies, and wield the power of their rings. But their minds were no longer their own. The rings whispered to them, pulling them ever closer to Sauron's control. Their first steps into corruption were subtle. They became paranoid, obsessed with their power, and consumed by a growing need to dominate those around them. What they didn't realize was that the rings were slowly warping their perception of reality. The longer they wore the rings, the further they slipped into madness. They began to lose their connection to the physical world, becoming increasingly bound to the realm of shadow. Their appearance changed as well. The 9 kings were no longer recognizable as men. Their bodies withered, and their once grand forms became gaunt, hollow figures wrapped in dark cloaks. In the end, they became invisible to the naked eye, perceivable only through their chilling, spectral presence. When they did appear, they were surrounded by an aura of terror and despair, and their touch could sap the very will of their victims. In the deep silence of the world's darkness, the Nazgul's voices could be heard in a cold whisper, often the only sign of their approach. Their physical bodies were gone, and they had become wraiths, spirit-like beings bound forever to the will of Sauron. These wraiths existed only to serve their master, hunting down any who stood in his way, from armies to lone travelers. Their souls were chained to the One Ring, which they could never leave, and they became a force of unyielding darkness, relentlessly pursuing the ring-bearer to reclaim what had been lost. As Sauron's most loyal servants, they acted as his agents of fear. The transformation into wraiths also stripped them of their former identities. The kings who had once ruled vast empires were now known only as the Nazgul, the ring wraiths, and their names were lost to time. The Nazgul's role in Sauron's empire. Once transformed into wraiths, the Nazgul were no longer mere mortals. They became the embodiment of Sauron's terror, the instruments of his dark will. With their newfound powers, the Nazgul became Sauron's most powerful agents. They were not simply servants. They were the enforcers of his empire, carrying out his every command with a chilling efficiency. The Nazgul were crucial to Sauron's campaigns of conquest. They spread fear wherever they went, casting an unnatural shadow over entire regions. Their mere presence was enough to break the will of even the most hardened warriors. They did not need armies of their own. They could instill terror in the hearts of the brave, paralyze entire armies with their presence, and turn the tide of battle in an instant. During the War of the Last Alliance, the Nazgul were Sauron's key military commanders. They led his forces against the combined armies of elves, dwarves, and men, spreading death and despair in their wake. Their role in the battle for Middle-earth was not just to fight, but to break the morale of the free peoples. They were masters of psychological warfare, turning the tide of many battles through fear alone. Sauron also used the Nazgul as his personal hunters. While the Dark Lord himself could not leave the confines of his stronghold in Mordor, the Nazgul acted as his eyes and ears in the world, relentlessly hunting for the One Ring. Their singular focus on finding the ring and bringing it back to Sauron became their obsession, and they tracked down anyone they suspected might possess it, no matter how far they had to travel or how many lives were lost along the way. The hunt for the One Ring. The hunt for the One Ring became the central focus of the Nazgul in the Third Age. After the fall of Sauron at the end of the Second Age, the One Ring was lost, and the Nazgul's task was to find it. But the ring remained hidden for centuries, leaving the Nazgul without their primary purpose. It was not until the ring was found by Gollum and then passed to Frodo Baggins that the Nazgul's hunt reignited. The wraiths were immediately sent to track down the ring, and they hunted Frodo and his companions across Middle-earth. The pursuit was relentless. From the moment Frodo left the Shire with the ring, the Nazgul were close behind, searching for any trace of the ring's presence. Their first major appearance was in the Quiet Shire, when they rode through the land in search of the ring. Disguised as riders cloaked in black, their very presence radiated an overwhelming sense of fear and death. It was only through the intervention of Aragorn, Gandalf, and the elves that Frodo was able to escape their clutches. But the Nazgul were never far behind. Throughout their pursuit, the Nazgul would stop at nothing to capture Frodo. They rode swiftly across the land, using their terrifying powers to detect the faintest trace of the ring's presence. In one of the most chilling scenes of the books, Frodo is nearly captured when he wears the ring to try to escape them. The Nazgul, sensing the ring's power, converge upon him like a pack of wolves closing in on their prey. At the same time, the ring's influence on the Nazgul began to take a toll on them. Their minds were increasingly consumed with the desire to claim the ring for Sauron, and they became even more dangerous and single-minded in their pursuit. The siege of Rivendell and the pursuit of the ring. The Nazgul's pursuit of Frodo continued to intensify, reaching its peak during the siege of Rivendell. Rivendell, the last homely house of the elves, had long been a safe haven from the forces of darkness. But when the Nazgul discovered that Frodo was harboring the One Ring, they relentlessly pursued him to the borders of the valley. The Ringwraith's arrival at Rivendell marked the beginning of the true danger. They had closed in on Frodo, who had made his way to Rivendell seeking sanctuary after the long journey from the Shire. They attacked with overwhelming force, using their terrifying powers to breach the defenses of the elves. However, Rivendell's location was protected by powerful enchantments and the vigilance of Elrond and the elven hosts. Even the Nazgul could not easily break the wards that protected the valley. Despite their failure to capture Frodo, the Nazgul were relentless. They would not stop until the ring was in their hands. As the Council of Elrond convened and a plan was formed to destroy the One Ring, the Nazgul's hunt for Frodo turned into a race against time. Frodo's journey from Rivendell to Mount Doom became a desperate fight for survival as the Nazgul's pursuit continued. The wraiths were not far behind, and every step Frodo took brought him closer to the confrontation with the forces of darkness that sought to claim the ring and plunge Middle-earth back into tyranny. The fall of Isengard and the Nazgul's unseen influence. While Sauron focused his attention on finding the One Ring, another dark power stirred in the east, Saruman, the White Wizard, once sent by the Valar to aid the free peoples of Middle-earth, but who had turned to Sauron's cause in secret. Saruman's betrayal marked a critical point in the War of the Ring as he began to build his own forces to rival Sauron. This rivalry would have far-reaching consequences, even for the Nazgul. Saruman, known for his mastery of the arcane, had also forged alliances with Sauron's servants, though his ambitions were ultimately independent. While Saruman's gaze was directed at conquering Rohan and Minas Tirith, Sauron's 9 ring wraiths remained largely uninvolved, preferring to focus on the task of recovering the One Ring. However, Saruman's treachery would later draw them into conflict. In the midst of Saruman's rise in the west, the Nazgul remained mostly in the shadows, watching with cold disdain as Saruman's power grew. They were aware of the wizard's ambitions, but they did not intervene directly, as they were bound to their mission to reclaim the One Ring. Still, Saruman's growing alliance with Sauron eventually brought him into direct conflict with the Nazgul. When Saruman's stronghold of Isengard fell to the Ents and the forces of Rohan, the Nazgul watched from afar. Though they did not directly involve themselves in the battle, the defeat of Saruman was a victory for the free peoples of Middle-earth. The Nazgul understood that Saruman's fall could have unforeseen consequences, weakening Sauron's already fragile alliance with the wizard. For now, however, they were consumed by their search for the ring. Saruman's defeat merely reminded them that their mission must be successful, or their lord would lose control over all of Middle-earth. The Battle of Helm's Deep in the shadow of the Nazgul. Helm's Deep, the stronghold of Rohan, became the focal point of one of the greatest battles of the Third Age, where King Theoden's forces faced the overwhelming might of Saruman's orcs and Uruk-hai. The battle itself was fierce, but what the people of Rohan did not know was that they were being watched by the Nazgul, whose presence in the shadows added an air of dread to the already dangerous conflict. As Saruman's forces gathered to assault Rohan, the Nazgul were poised to take advantage of the chaos. They did not fight in the battle directly, for the ring wraiths preferred to remain hidden, serving as shadowy observers, subtly manipulating events to ensure Sauron's plan for domination proceeded unimpeded. Their primary concern was not Rohan's immediate destruction, but ensuring that the forces of Gondor and Rohan were weakened, leaving no obstacles to Sauron's inevitable rise to power. While the battle raged outside Helm's Deep, the Nazgul remained vigilant in their search for the ring, ever watchful of the movements of Aragorn, Gandalf, and the other members of the Fellowship. Their attention was divided. While they understood the importance of Saruman's armies, they were still determined to find Frodo and the ring. At the same time, the Nazgul's indirect influence could be felt in the fear and panic they inspired. The presence of these wraiths, even if unseen, left an imprint on the battlefield. The morale of Rohan's warriors faltered, as they knew that no matter how many orcs they slew, a greater and more terrible force was out there, drawing ever closer. The Nazgul, it seemed, would always be just a few steps behind. In the end, despite their distance from the battle, The Nazgul's looming threat helped tip the scales in Saruman's favor. His forces overwhelmed Rohan's defenses, but the tide of the battle was turned at the last moment by the intervention of Gandalf and the riders of Rohan. For the Nazgul, it was a missed opportunity to snuff out the last remaining hope of the Free Peoples, but their pursuit of the ring would not falter. The assault on Minas Tirith and the Nazgul's terror. The siege of Minas Tirith is one of the most climactic moments of the War of the Ring, and it was here that the Nazgul truly showed the full extent of their terror. By this time, they had already become feared across Middle-earth, their mere presence causing entire armies to tremble. But the siege of Minas Tirith, the capital of Gondor, would be their greatest test and their most iconic moment. Under the leadership of Denethor, the steward of Gondor, Minas Tirith faced an onslaught from Sauron's forces, led by his orcs, trolls, and the Nazgul. The ring-wraiths arrived with their full, terrifying presence, riding their black steeds and cloaked in darkness, their very arrival heralding an unnatural storm. The people of Gondor were familiar with the Nazgul's power, but nothing could prepare them for the full scale of the terror that descended upon the city. The Nazgul took to the skies in their fell beasts, creating an atmosphere of dread that was palpable. Their presence alone struck fear into the hearts of Gondor's defenders, and the city's walls were assailed by the full fury of Sauron's armies. What made this siege particularly horrific was the role the Nazgul played in breaking the will of the city's defenders. Their shrieks and cries echoed through the streets, driving men to madness and despair. At the heart of the battle, the Nazgul targeted Aragorn, Gandalf, and the other leaders of Gondor's defense. They could sense that the greatest hope for Gondor lay with Aragorn, the heir of Isildur, and they sought to crush that hope. The ring-wraiths pursued him relentlessly, but Aragorn, with the help of Gandalf and the riders of Rohan, fought bravely to defend the city. As the Nazgul pressed closer, a key moment came when Gandalf, with his great power, stood against the Nazgul on the steps of the White City. The standoff was brief, but it showed the true terror of the Nazgul's power, an overwhelming fear that threatened to break even the most stalwart. However, the arrival of the riders of Rohan, led by King Theoden, was a turning point in the battle. With the forces of Gondor rallied and the city's defenders emboldened, the Nazgul's grip began to weaken. Though the ring-wraiths still held sway over much of the battlefield, the hope of the Free Peoples began to rise. The Nazgul's obsession with the ring. Throughout the War of the Ring, the Nazgul's obsession with finding the One Ring only intensified. They knew that the fate of Middle-earth rested on the success or failure of their mission. Sauron's dominance could not be fully realized without the ring, and they were willing to stop at nothing to reclaim it. In their pursuit, the Nazgul had become almost mindless, driven by a singular goal: to find the ring and return it to Sauron. This obsession dominated their every thought and action, unlike their earlier days as kings, when they had ruled with grandeur and ambition. The ring-wraiths were now consumed by their enslavement to the One Ring. They no longer had personal desires or motives. They were mere instruments of Sauron's will. The closer they came to Frodo and the ring, the more desperate and ruthless they became. Their methods grew increasingly violent and relentless as they used any means at their disposal to track the ring. Even the tiniest clue could send them racing across Middle-earth, their black horses flying across plains and through forests, their wraith-like presence a reminder of their power. Despite their power, the Nazgul were not invincible. The ring had a strange effect on them, a draw they could not escape. As Frodo grew closer to Mount Doom, the ring-wraiths grew more desperate and more dangerous. They pushed further into the depths of Mordor and its surrounding lands, attempting to corner their prey. The final confrontation and the end of the Nazgul. The Nazgul's reign of terror came to a tragic and dramatic end at the very gates of Mordor, where Frodo, Sam, and Gollum made their final push to destroy the One Ring. It was here that the Nazgul's long pursuit reached its culmination. As Frodo and Sam entered Mordor, the ring-wraiths knew that they were nearing their objective. They could feel the power of the ring growing stronger, and their drive to reclaim it reached a fever pitch. Their army, a vast force of orcs and dark creatures, followed in their wake. The final battle took place at Mount Doom, where Frodo faced the ultimate test. As he stood on the precipice, preparing to cast the ring into the fires, the Nazgul were poised to stop him. They had the ring in their grasp, but it was too late. In the end, it was not the Nazgul who destroyed the ring, but Gollum, driven by his obsession. In his madness, Gollum bit off Frodo's finger and claimed the ring for himself, but in doing so, he fell into the fires of Mount Doom, and the ring was destroyed. With the destruction of the ring, the Nazgul's existence was undone, their forms shattered, their powers destroyed, and the terror they had spread across Middle-earth was finally broken. Sauron's dominion over the land crumbled with them, and the shadow that had threatened to consume the world was banished forever. The Nazgul, once mighty kings, were reduced to nothing. Their obsession with the ring had sealed their doom. Their fall was a tragic reminder of the corrupting power of the One Ring and the terrible cost of Sauron's dominion. The aftermath of the Nazgul's fall. The destruction of the One Ring marked the collapse of Sauron's power, and with it, the end of the Nazgul's reign of terror. The ring-wraiths had been bound to the ring's power, and when it was destroyed, they were released from their ethereal existence. The skies over Mordor darkened as the very presence of the Nazgul vanished, leaving the world to breathe in a collective sigh of relief. But while their physical forms were gone, the echoes of their terror would be felt across Middle-earth for many years. In Gondor, Rohan, and the Shire, the people celebrated their newfound freedom, yet there was an undeniable sense of loss in the air. The Nazgul had caused destruction on an unimaginable scale, and their departure left a scar that would take centuries to heal. Many of the peoples who had fought against the Shadow began to rebuild their homes and communities, but the memory of the 9 ring-wraiths lingered in the hearts of all. In Minas Tirith, King Aragorn, newly crowned as Elisar, knew that his people would need to be ever vigilant against any new threats that might rise. He worked tirelessly to strengthen alliances with the kingdoms of Rohan and beyond, knowing that the fall of the Nazgul did not signal the end of all evil in Middle-earth. Though the Shadow had been vanquished, the remnants of Sauron's forces still loomed on the fringes of the world. Even so, the destruction of the Nazgul was seen as a turning point, one of hope. The ring-wraiths had been servants to a tyrant, and now that tyrant was gone. The world of men, elves, dwarves, and hobbits had been freed from the oppression of the Dark Lord's will. However, in the quietest corners of Middle-earth, in the shadowed places that even the light of victory could not reach, whispers of the Nazgul's legend still stirred. Even in death, the ring-wraiths remained potent symbols of power and terror. The people of Gondor would never forget the wailing shrieks of the 9, nor would they ever underestimate the cost of facing such malevolent forces. The legacy of the ring-wraiths. While the Nazgul had been defeated, their legacy lived on long after their demise. Their existence, tied to the Ring of Power, had come to symbolize the corrupting influence of absolute power and the ultimate cost of servitude. The story of their fall was recounted in countless tales, some told around hearths by bards, others written in the ancient texts of scholars who chronicled the rise and fall of empires. For many, the fall of the Nazgul was a warning. The 9 had once been kings, rulers of their realms, endowed with great wealth and wisdom, yet their desire for the One Ring had driven them into darkness. The ring-wraiths became a powerful allegory for those who sought power at any cost, be they rulers, soldiers, or even individuals who felt they could bend fate to their will. The kings who had become the Nazgul were not born evil, but they had fallen into ruin because of their arrogance and greed. For generations, the people of Middle-earth would remember them not just as enemies of their freedom, but as tragic figures whose lust for the ring had consumed them. In Gondor, The legacy of the Nazgul persisted in the form of memorials and stories. Young warriors would often speak of how their ancestors had fought against the ring wraiths, and old men would still tell tales of their terrifying presence. But as the years turned into decades, the memory of the Nazgul began to fade. Their names, once feared, became distant echoes of a darker time, relegated to legend and myth. Despite their defeat, the Nazgul had one lasting effect. They reinforced the idea that evil, once confronted, could be defeated, but the struggle would always remain. Every time a threat arose in Middle-earth, it would be compared to the shadow of the Nazgul, a reminder of the darkness that could return if vigilance was not maintained. The final shadows of the Nazgul. Though the ring wraiths were no more, the ripples of their existence could still be felt in certain places. In the wilds of Middle-earth, where the land had once been tainted by Sauron's evil, there remained lingering traces of the Nazgul's malevolent power. Some of the places where they had once ruled, like the Black Land of Mordor and the ruined fortress of Barad-dûr, continued to cast a dark shadow over the world. The ruins of Barad-dûr, where the Dark Lord had once dwelled, remained a place of dread. Even after the fall of Sauron, there were some who still believed that evil could return from the ashes of the old empire. Many adventurers and treasure hunters sought out the ruins, drawn by the promise of ancient riches. But they found only the hollow echoes of the past, a reminder of the price of ambition and corruption. Some remnants of Sauron's servants too remained. The orcs and trolls who had fought in his armies were scattered across Middle-earth, but without the driving force of the Nazgul to guide them, they turned to petty warlords, raiding and pillaging without direction or purpose. These small bands of orcs were little more than a nuisance to the free peoples, but they were a reminder that the shadow had once covered the land, and it could return again in a different form. Among the elves, there were still those who whispered of the dark power that had once controlled the Nine. Elrond, Galadriel, and the other elven leaders knew the true danger of the Nazgul. They were not just servants of Sauron, but also symbols of the dangers of absolute domination and the seduction of power. Even after Sauron's fall, there remained a lingering sense that darkness could return, and the lessons learned from the Nazgul's rise and fall would never be forgotten. The eternal struggle, a reflection on the Nazgul's fate. As time passed and the memories of the Nazgul became myths, Middle-earth began to heal. The world that had once trembled under the shadow of the ring wraiths was slowly rebuilt, with new alliances formed and old wounds mended. The free peoples were united under the leadership of Aragorn, who ruled as Elisar, and his reign brought a new age of peace and prosperity to the realms of men. Yet even in this age of renewal, there was an understanding that the struggle against evil was never truly over. The fall of the Nazgul had been a hard-won victory, but it was not the end of the story. The ring wraiths had been defeated, but the lessons they left behind would never be forgotten. Power, once sought, could never be entirely relinquished. The ring had corrupted even the noblest of kings, and those who sought absolute control were forever at risk of losing their humanity. The Nazgul, though no longer physically present, had left an indelible mark on the world. Their story was a reminder of the perils of greed, the dangers of subjugating one's will to the power of a single object, and the cost of losing oneself to darkness. In many ways, they were a reflection of the world itself, a world that had been shaped by the ambition of men and the unrelenting march of time. As long as there were those who desired power and control, there would always be the potential for darkness to rise again. The story of the Nazgul was one of ultimate corruption, but it was also one of hope. A reminder that even in the darkest hour, when all seems lost, the light of resistance could shine through. And so, as the world moved forward, the legacy of the Nazgul was not just one of fear, but also one of defiance. The Nazgul had been defeated, but the struggle for freedom would continue forever, carried forward by the memory of those who had fought and triumphed over the shadow. Conclusion. As the darkness of the Nazgul finally lifted from Middle-earth, peace began to return to the shattered lands. The free peoples, once consumed by fear and despair, could now rebuild and heal. The memory of the ringwraiths, however, remained, a chilling reminder of the seductive danger of power and the consequences of ambition unchecked. Their tragic fall from glory to wraiths, bound to Sauron's will, left behind a powerful lesson for generations to come. That the lust for power comes at a far greater cost than one can ever imagine. Though the Nazgul were no more, their story would live on, woven into the very fabric of Middle-earth's history. A tale of what happens when humanity succumbs to darkness. It serves as a warning to all who seek dominion over others. Thank you for joining me on this journey through the rise and fall of the Nazgul. If you enjoyed this exploration into the dark heart of Middle-earth, be sure to like, subscribe, and click the bell icon so you never miss a future dive into the mysteries of this legendary world. What do you think would have happened if the Nazgul had never been corrupted by the One Ring? How do you think their story could have unfolded differently? Share your thoughts in the comments below. Thanks again for watching.